Hi, my name is Michael Goodfriend, and I'm the executive producer of the Play On podcasts. My guest today is an acclaimed poet, playwright, screenwriter, whom the New Yorker describes as the heir to Garcia Lorca, Pirandello, and Tennessee Williams. No pressure. He was named the Library Laureate of San Francisco, the recipient of the Doris Duke Artist Award and the 2015 Glickman Award. He was a finalist for the 2015 Kennedy Prize and a 2019 Obie Award winner for The House That Will Not Stand. His other plays include X, or Betty Shabazz versus the Nation, Black Odyssey, The Gospel of Loving Kindness, Every Tongue Confess, On the Levee, and The Road Weeps, The Well Runs Dry. His feature adaptation of The Color Purple musical will be released in theaters in December of 2022, and his Marvin Gaye biopic was just picked up by Warner Brothers with Alan Hughes attached to direct. On TV, he's written for The Exorcist, for Fox, Z, The Beginning of Everything for Amazon, Mindhunter, and Tales of the City for Netflix, and The Chi for Showtime. He's currently developing shows at OWN and Hulu, as well as working on films for HBO and Fox Searchlight. And he also translated Shakespeare's King Lear into modern English verse for Play on Shakespeare, which has been produced as a podcast series by Next Chapter Podcasts. It's my honor to have Marcus Gardley with me today. Marcus, welcome to the Play On Podcast bonus content series for King Lear.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
When did you know you were going to be a playwright?
So when I was growing up, I hadn't seen a play actually till I got to college. And so when I saw my first play, which was this Rita Dove's The Darker Side of the Earth, which was actually at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. It was the first time I've been there. And I didn't know that a play could have so much poetry. I was familiar with Shakespeare, but this was a modern play. This was a contemporary play. And that I just saw I was in this space where all this language was alive and it was doing things to my body and it was doing things to the audience. And I was already a poet and had loved, just really loved writing poetry. It was my number one thing. And I just thought, let me try my hand at it. And the first time I walked into a classroom and heard my play alive, I changed everything. I changed my major. I changed my plan for my future. Literally everything changed in that moment. And I haven't looked back since. So it's really that moment of really seeing the language alive and in the mouths of other people. Because, when you're a poet, oftentimes you're reading your own work, at poetry slams or what have you. But, the gift of having several actors activate that language in real time. I just knew that was my purpose on this planet. And I have been doing it ever since.
How old were you?
I was 19. Yeah.
And you were a student at the time?
Yeah, I was a student at St. Mary's College in Moraga. So I was a college student and I was a French major. And so I changed my major. I changed everything. And I was going to do international business and I was going to move to Paris and live there. And, all of that changed.
What was the first play you wrote?
The first play I wrote was a play called Live and Tire, which was actually produced. I ended up leaving St. Mary's and going to San Francisco State University. And I entered in the playwriting contest. And I had this really great professor named Roy Comboy. And I did a one-on-one with him. And I was working on this play. And it was a really great experience because, I was so used to getting feedback and, needing constant, critiques, but also, constant support. And every time I turned in a draft, I would say, well, what do you think? And he would say, well, what do you think? And I would say, I don't know what I think. That's why I'm here. And it was such a valuable lesson that I use to this day. And his gift that he gave me is, if you don't love the work, how will we love it? And so when he kept throwing it on me, he would never tell me what he thought of the play. And when he kept putting it on me, I started to write what I wanted to hear. I started to write the world that I saw, because it was really up to me. And then, I was entering this contest and he selected that play. It was such an honor. And so that was the first play that I wrote and the first play that I saw staged. And it won this festival, which is a great opportunity.
Where did you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Oakland, California. My father's a pastor. My mom's a nurse. And I was raised in a very, very large family. My dad has 10 sisters and 4 brothers. And my mom was raised with her cousins and her siblings, which was amounts to about 11. And all of those people had kids. And all of those kids were like my neighbors and I grew up with. So I always had a lot of relatives and a lot of people around me. And so the plays that I write tend to be very large, which is also, my obsession with Shakespeare, because he writes these big worlds, these large scale plays with a lot of characters. So that's why I was able to really relate to Shakespeare, because that's the world in which I saw. There was always a lot of people around. I was always surrounded by people that loved me and people that told great stories. In our family, if you really want to be well respected, you better come with a great story. That's how you sort of get clout in my family.
So your siblings and you would compete to tell stories, to do like who had the best story, or just outdo each other at dinner, topping each other.
Absolutely. So my great grandmother, who lived to be 104, unfortunately we lost her last year, but she was the griot. So she was like the keeper of the stories. And so she had all of her stories back to her father, who was a slave. And one of the stories she used to tell, which is sort of like our family story, she would say, "This is the story of Madison Eaton, who freed himself from slavery." That was always the first 3 lines. And so we always had this big gift, knowing that our great grandfather, actually he would have been my great great grandfather, freed himself. And it's a beautiful story about how he made Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it's probably not true, but that's the beauty of these stories. They always grow and they always change. And this was passed down to all my siblings, and all my siblings are writers. We all are storytellers. And I think it's just this major gift that our great grandmother gave us. I just love the stories.
How many siblings?
I have 3. There's 4 total, 3 others besides me, and they all write. So one's a poet, one writes novels, one's more of an illustrator and a short story writer, and then I'm the TV, film, theater person. So none of us are in the same genre, because that would create drama. But we all
you already have enough competition with each other.
Absolutely.
And where do you fall in the line of the siblings?
Oh, I'm number 2.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm number 2.
And you say that you found comfort, or you felt familiarity with Shakespeare because of the large sweeping stories and the multiple characters. Do you remember when it was that you first encountered Shakespeare?
I do. The first Shakespeare play I saw was Taming of the Shrew. And it was a company, I believe it was the Royal Shakespeare Company. It was actually a company from the UK. And they did this really amazing thing where they came out on the stage and they had no costumes and they had no set. And they said that they didn't need it. And they were talking amongst themselves, but kind of talking to us. And they just started speaking the language, and the world, it was like magic. It's like things started to change. Eventually, it started coming out with costumes and set pieces, but they didn't need it. And I fell in love with that play. And I had read the play before and hated it. But when I saw it acted out, and they understood every word, you could tell. And because you understood every word, because they knew every word, then you understood every word. And then I ran, and I remember seeing the play and literally running to the library and grabbing it. And so this can't be the same play that I read when I was in high school. There's no way that that's just, and of course it was. And I even remember some of it now. That's how rich that world was. I still remember hearing that language in space, and also hating the end and loving the play, because you could hate a play and still love a play. And you could love a writer and still not agree with the message of the play. It's just, that's what that play gave me. And then I read all of his plays after that, because I thought, oh, it is true. He is brilliant.
And yet, so you understood every word because of the way it was performed. And here you've done a translation of Shakespeare, of King Lear. How did that journey happen? And what do you come away with, having gone through this process of translating?
I love this question. So when you, as a writer, the real writing happens when you rewrite. So if you, as a playwright, you write a first draft of a play, and really the first draft of a play is you just getting it out. We always call it the vomit draft. You just get it out. And then when you take some time away from that and come back to the play, then you're actually listening to yourself and you're learning, oh, the play is speaking to you. Now you're in conversation, and that's when the real writing happens. So what got excited me about this project is I have an opportunity to actually have a conversation with a man who is no longer here. because I can get into the roots of what do these words mean. All of that, I can get in a conversation with him. And so that's what excited me about this child. I never thought about it until, Louie at OSF brought it to me, and she really pitched the project to me. And my first response, I have to be honest, was, I'm not doing that, because I said, I just know everybody's going to attack me. Why are you touching this sacred text and what have you? And but then when I sat with it and I thought, you know what, this is a great idea for me to understand him, because some of the plays, I always remember Aaron Moore in that section of Titus Andronicus, and every time there's a scene in which he says the character describes himself as being evil because he has black skin, and every time I see that scene on stage, I cry and I get very angry. And so I said, so this is a writer that I both love, and he's done things that makes me hate him. And so I thought, I want to try to get into his brain. And so what's great about doing this modern translation of King Lear is I got a chance to, because it's an assignment, I got a chance to really study and research what these words mean. It's almost like researching a spell, right? What is the chemistry? What is the alchemy of this text? And why does it do things to people? And so I spent a good 3 years studying every one of these words, because I wanted to make sure that it's like this process has been, the only way I can describe it is, people who restore art with those fine brushes, or archaeologists digging up dinosaur bones with toothbrushes. It really was that, because you don't want to mess with the art. You just want to clean it in a way, and clean it, not that it's dirty, just illuminate is the best way to describe, illuminate what's already there, so that people who may not have access to some of the more abstract language can engage in it in a more intimate way. That when you for the majority of the audience, this is my argument would be, for the majority of audiences, approaching a Shakespeare play is when you get something and then something else happens and you don't get it. You get stuck there in that moment where you don't get, and it takes you out of where you should be paying attention to the next beat. And so I wanted to give audience an experience where they can just stay on track the whole way through, that we gave them the gift of understanding every beat in this play. And hopefully I've accomplished that.
So for you, it was an opportunity to make it as immediate to a listener or to a viewer as it would have been for the audience in Shakespeare's time?
That's exactly right. That's a beautiful way to describe it. But also to really experience Shakespeare, you should grapple. So we don't want to pander to the audience. We don't make it so easy that that's part of the joy of Shakespeare, is that you have to grapple with the text. So I did personally use, big SAT words, if you will, one way to describe it. But also I was trying to be creative with words where I was combining words. We purposely used words, or I purposely used words that were still in Old English. So that you have hopefully you have that experience that we all love, where you grapple with the language and you have to engage in a way where you have to hang on to every beat of the story.
So when we first talked about this project, you were very clear in your vision, and you talked about San Francisco as a setting. You talked about jazz as part of the soundscape. Can you open that up for us a little bit and talk about why that location, and also the period being very specific? What were the choices there, and how does it inform the text?
Thank you for this question. Obviously I'm born and raised in the Bay Area, and it's my favorite place on the planet so far. So it always speaks to me. I'm always writing about it. I'm always deeply interested with it. I am very protective of where I come from. So it's always just in my periphery. And so when I was grappling with this text, I would spend a lot of time in the Bay Area, but also the play was speaking to me in a weird way about where I'm from, because the play in a lot of ways is about where are you from? Who are you? Where are you from? What does your lineage mean, right? How are you connected in the family? What is your role in the family? And so all of these themes kept coming up, and I kept thinking about King Lear. And then certain things start to pop out, which I was like, of course I'm thinking about King Lear, because King Lear is a man who comes from who, when the play starts, is the very highest station you can be. He's at the top of the food chain. And he subsequently, throughout the play, loses his place to, one could argue, the lowest place where you could be. And one of the things about growing up in the Bay Area is because it's so rife with gentrification and poverty, and because the wealth gap is so immense that you can literally go from a place of prosperity, whatever that means to you, into a place of disparity and despair, right? And so I started thinking about King Lear when he's crying out to the thunder, when he's roaming the streets at night, half clothed, when he's losing his mind. These are all our brothers and sisters on the streets of San Francisco who have no home, right? Who at one point, and I use this word king metaphorically, but who were kings, who we saw as kings and queens, and now are, roaming the street. These are our kings. What happened, right? This also looking at the architecture of these Victorian homes, which when I was growing up, we called them castles. And when I was growing up, you had like to be in a neighborhood. If you were a person in a neighborhood that had a lot of value, you had a castle, and those were always passed down. No one just got a castle. It was, when I was growing up, if you had one, your grandfather, your parents gave you that. And to see those homes be given away was like you saw the neighborhood grieve, because we knew the value of those homes. We knew that those homes, people took care of them. They took care of their lawns. They manicured their lawns. We had a neighbor who will go on his lawn. He cut his lawns with scissors, hand scissors. You know what I mean? And so to know the value of the neighbor and to see it all change, and to see the Bay Area experience a sort of dementia. These themes in King Lear just kept popping up, but also this idea of we can keep a place, we can keep a castle if we work together. But in King Lear, it's the siblings are fighting each other, the brothers are fighting each other, the generations are warring against each other, and so everybody loses when you do that.
And the houses you're describing, what neighborhood was it in?
So I grew up in West Oakland in a neighborhood of Linden Street, which is sort of the San Pablo, Linden area near McClymonds High School. So they had a lot of the Victorian homes, but they're really pretty much here. There's a lot more in West Oakland and East Oakland. But none of those homes, if they're very few of them are still there, and those that are there are, they don't have the look and the pristine look that they once had. But predominantly West Oakland. There are quite a few in Berkeley. There's quite a few in San Francisco. Obviously, they have quite a few.
So, for an example of the type of home you're describing, if somebody were to look it up or to look on Google or something like that, what would they do? Where would they find it?
Actually, the best thing to do is there's a really beautiful movie called The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which that entire movie is about the loss of one of those homes. And so, yeah.
And what about King Lear at that time that you encountered this project? What about the character himself drew you in?
So one thing that drew me in is, unfortunately, right now my father is dealing with dementia, but early stages. I think he'll be okay with me saying that. And so just the our family dealing with the illness and grappling with the early stages of it was happening while I was writing it. And so the play, I purposely chose that play because one of the beautiful gifts that writers have is writing is a very therapeutic process. And so I knew working on that play, I could start dealing with, I guess the word is grief, my grief over the knowledge that my dad, is going to lose his memory. And so that's that's my number one reason for choosing that play. And it helped me immensely. I knew it would help me, but it's been more, a bigger gift than I could ever imagine. But I also wanted to sort of get into the bones of who King Lear was. And so emotionally, as I was already attracted to him because of, my family situation, but he is a king. I've never been a king. I don't come from wealth. And so I really start to look at him as sort of a political figure, and also look at him as a father. And I start to really examine what happens when a man loses their partner, what happens when a woman loses their partner, and hasn't to raise 3 adult kids. And when you get to a point in your life where you feel like you want to get your flowers, right? You demand respect. What is that about? So that's really what I wanted. I really wanted to sit back and sort of step in his shoes and not judge him, because that's the easiest thing to do, judge him as a character. But Aaron Loeb, who's a really great playwright, also from the Bay Area, gave me this really gift ages ago. And he said, the biggest gift you can give your characters as a writer is to love them. Love the ones that are antagonistic, love the villains. He said, you should love them all. And so I really tried to find a way to love King Lear and really understand who he is and why he's so angry. And that was both a challenge, and I'm still studying him. It's just been really a great journey.
When we first talked about the project, you sent me and some of the other folks who were involved in on the creative side of things, a whole bunch of links to jazz from all different time periods. Why jazz? What about jazz helps illuminate this story?
I love this question. So jazz is obviously one of America's greatest gifts to the world. I think it's like the musical theater, jazz. I forget the other one, but those are definitely one of the two of the major ones. And my love for jazz is also linked to my grief about jazz, which is that it feels like it's a dying art in a lot of ways. Even though one could argue that hip hop is definitely the son, the daughter of jazz. But I'm thinking about that when I'm thinking about this city, this Bay Area city that is undergoing this revitalization, this gentrification, and what are they losing? And so one of the beautiful things about this place where this play takes place is jazz. This place in the Fillmore district in San Francisco, where the play takes place, was considered Harlem West. And it was called Harlem West because it was the second most important jazz center in the United States outside of Harlem. Of course, New Orleans, I would say the third, but people say it was the second, but I would say the third. But nevertheless, and so when you're losing these kings, when you're losing these castles, you're also losing this sound. You're also losing the sound that these kings made in these castles. And that's what jazz was to me. It's like this beautiful, regal sound, this combination of classical instruments and the blues, right? This beautiful melange of cultures. All of that is being lost, and all of it was beautiful. The jazz expresses both the heartache and the beauty of the period and this play, right? Because a jazz horn can, in 1 second, be wailing, screaming with anger and pain, and in the second be the most beautiful thing you've ever heard. And so I knew jazz was the perfect sound to express this play and this adaptation.
Do you have a sort of an attachment or an intuitive connection to any single character in Lear more than any other? Cordelia more than Lear, or Edmund, or any of the others? Do you feel a resonance with one character in particular?
You know what? This may shock you, but the character that I relate, I don't know if relate is the word, but that I feel more for is Edmund. And some may argue he's the most diabolical out of all of them. But, I know it's because I always see him as the artist who is, has a really strong inner saboteur. That they'd like to have this the part of them that it's they can't gain anything unless they destroy other people. I know a friend who's like that. That everything they accomplish is from stepping on another person. And the real tragedy with Edmund is that anybody that can accomplish all of the things that he's accomplished in a short amount of time is a genius and is brilliant. And if he knew his value, if he didn't allow the world to label him as a bastard and believe that that's what he was, then one could argue not only would he, achieve the high place that he achieved in the play, but also he wouldn't have to do it by tearing other people down. And he could be a source of, what's really beautiful about what Shakespeare done with him is he's actually a source of in a lot of ways, people all orbit around him and people benefit from his genius. But, like in most Shakespeare plays, because he's a tragic character, because he doesn't know his own value, his value comes from a place of narcissism as opposed to a place of, wanting to help, but it's not altruistic. So I actually feel for him as a character. And what's really interesting is in the last few scenes, you see him start to sort of get it, but it's too late. Because there's some lines where you start to get, he's actually have compassion for people. He has compassion for Cordelia, but it's too late. And that's just the brilliance of Shakespeare. It's like in 2 or 3 lines, it just tells you a world of things. So I love that about that character.
He's kind of a mirror in a way for some of the other characters, the Edmund Edgar brother relationship. How is that in contrast with some of the other siblings and characters in the play? Can you talk about that?
Sure, yeah. So the most obvious is the Cordelia, Goneril, Regan dichotomy. That, what Shakespeare is doing is at the top, that there's something very noble about Cordelia because, everybody else is, brown nosing or pumping the father up or what have you. She's staying true to who she is. And at the same time, professing her profound love for her father, right? And so one could argue that she is actually more of a mirror. I would argue she's more of a mirror of Edmund, right? But she's doing hers she's challenging the system for good. And I would say Edmund is challenging the system as bad because according to him, the system is, if you're a bastard, you are, second best. If, you're always going to be behind. So he's challenging the system as being the least beloved son. And she's challenging the system for being clearly the most beloved daughter.
And she's the idealist. She's saying we can be better. And he's saying we're bad no matter what.
Yeah, well, she's saying to her father, we can be better without, we can be better in terms of the body politic without us having to always acknowledge that you're the greatest thing ever. You know what I mean? You could just split this land without us having to brown nose or beg you. Like you can just split the land because it's the right thing to do. And Edmund is saying, you can give me what's half of the land just because I'm your son. I have no control over that. I don't have the same mother as my brother. But we're all sort of like products of our society. One could argue with Edmund is if he doesn't go the route he's gone, he'll never get anything, right? But again, this was so fascinating about Shakespeare. It's like, even if you really sort of analyze Edmund and Cordelia, she's much more brave than he is. Because she gives up everything. She loses everything. Even the idea of her, marrying Franz, she didn't know him. I mean, not really, right? He confesses, when arguing that early scene, his love for her, one could argue, but there's no lines from her that she feels the same. So she goes with a stranger, one could argue, and gives up everything because it's the right thing to do. Powerful. And in Edmund's mind he's gaining everything because in his mind it's the right thing to do. He's doing, it's an opposite trajectory. So I think those are the two mirrors, I would say. And then a lot of ways, I think more of Edgar is more of a mirror of Lear to me. That's a great scene where they sort of look at each other as a mirror. But there's a lot of that. There's the mirror of the fool in Lear. It's a lot of that. There's the dual character that Kent is playing. It's a lot of mirroring in this play, which is really quite beautiful.
You were open and even suggested making Kent, casting a woman in the role of Kent. Can you talk about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I really like that idea because, It's like I always think this is on purpose with Shakespeare. Every time you think, "Ooh, that's a happy accident," you're like, "Oh no, that was on purpose." I had a professor in college. I took a Shakespearean class when I realized I wanted to be a playwright, and he broke down how the absence of the mother is the real tragedy in the whole play. That the absence of the mother creates all of this friction in the world, and that's why people are spinning out. And so there's something really great about the character of Kent being played by a woman um, as Kent, right? So, and then when the woman plays the man, right? And because she's always had to do that in this patriarchal society, in this kingdom, she's always had to play to get anywhere. She's always had to take on these patriarchal norms. It speaks volumes to the nature of that play and the themes and the multi layers of the play. So I always love that. I'm going to always try to do that when we cast in the play. I just think it's a interesting choice.
Not till this moment did I ever actually stop to think about or even realize the mother's absence in
Yes.
King Lear. It's a play I know very, very well. I've seen dozens and dozens of times, and obviously worked on the podcast series of your translation. The absence of the mother and what that does to the family is really profound.
Absolutely. And if you look at his other plays, the queens are always there. They're always there. So this is clearly a purposeful choice. This is not an accident.
Marcus, you were raised by a pastor, you said,
Yes.
Your father, and there is a lot of spiritual overtones in your work across the board. The gospel of love and kindness. There are references, and even in your titles. What role did faith have in shaping you as an artist?
Oh, everything. So, I always say that my childhood was full of like magic and wonder and language because, physically being in a church most of your life, like literally physically, we were in church most of my childhood and being drenched in all of that text, which is also Old English text, right? So being drenched with all of that ancient text, and I mean that in the best sense of that word, we believed in things that, most people don't believe in. I've seen people be healed. I've seen it with my own eyes. It wasn't performed. That couldn't have been. So we just saw things that was like, it gave you something as a child to witness all of those things. And so when I got into theater, and theater is all about magic, theater is all about the possibility of the impossibility. I just had just naturally the spirituality of what I grew up in this very religious household and belief in things that you cannot see just naturally came into my work as a playwright. And I always believed that the real healing of that can happen is all through language. That if language can start a war, surely language can heal people who suffered from a war, and language can prevent a war. So it's in everything. I had the beautiful gift of like, sitting around old Black women who, survived Jim Crow and hearing their hymns. You can't grow up with that and not believe in things that you cannot see.
You've seen people healed. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. This the church that I grew up in, it was Pentecostal, and healing and prophecy was a major tenet of the faith. And so, people would come in wheelchairs and they will walk. People would, get diagnosed with, you have such and such days to live, and they're still alive to this day. So we just seen just amazing things. And it wasn't shocking because it happened so much. But it also wasn't a church with that, some churches like Benny Hinn, some churches, that's their thing. They go and heal. It wasn't the thing where you just happened to do it. But it was quite incredible. It was like, we didn't have Harry Potter. So that was the closest we was getting to any kind of like magic or anything like that. But I remember My favorite part of the whole of growing up in the Church of God in Christ was prophecies, which of course is huge in Shakespeare. But being prophesied to was amazing because you knew the future, you knew your future, and it gave you had power then. If you knew what you were supposed to do or what you were going to do or what you were going to achieve, the sky was the limit, But I didn't have, like, if you'd have talked to me when I was 12 and you said you're going to be a playwright, I would say, what is that? You know what I mean? But if you said to me, you're going to work in the theater, I would probably have said, oh my God, I would be so excited. But I didn't know, the reason it's hard to answer your question is because I didn't know that I could do those things. I didn't know that you could be a playwright. I mean, I knew that people wrote plays, but the world that I lived in was small in the sense that everybody that I knew either went to my church or lived on my street. It was I lived in a little bit of a bubble, and none of those people saw plays, none of them. So it just wasn't something that occurred to me. But had you told me, I'll give you an example. The first story I ever wrote, I was in third grade, and I'll never forget it. It's the first thing I've ever wrote, and it was 20 pages. And it's the first thing I ever wrote. And it was so good, the teacher made me read it in front of class. And I was so nervous, I thought I'm going to die because I was shy. I don't want to read this in front of anybody, and why is she making me read it? And what I had done without thinking about it, it's hard to describe. This will make sense to you now to answer your question. What I had done without even considering it is I had put everybody in the class, and this class was 2 classes because they had combined 4th and 5th. So there was easily 30 students. I had put everybody in the class in the short story, and everybody had a name and a word that described their name that was an alliteration. So if your name was John, it'd be Jumpin' John. And anyway, long story short, I read the thing, and every time it came to somebody's name and I read their name, I had also picked a verb that people in the class knew really described them as in real life, right? They would laugh, and they were so happy because I had figured out who they were. And when I started doing it, I wasn't surprised that what I wrote. I was surprised the reaction that people had. And I knew that when I was doing that I wanted to do more of that. I just didn't know. That's too much fun. There's nowhere in the world you're going to get paid to do that. That's impossible. So had you told me at that age that I was going to be a writer, I would have been so happy. I don't know if that helped answer.
This concludes part 1 of my interview with Marcus Gardley. Be sure to listen in next week when part 2 becomes available. You can learn more about the Play On Podcast at Next Chapter Podcast's website, ncpodcasts.com. That's N as in next, C as in chapter, podcasts with an S at the end, .com, where you can find other Play On podcast series and interviews, along with talk podcasts like The 500, The 10, The Tough Juice podcast with Karan Butler, and a whole lot more. I'd like to thank Jeremiah Tittle, the founder of Next Chapter Podcasts, and my producer, Peter Musto. Our audio engineer is Adam Bernard, and our editor and sound designer is Justin Cortez. Be sure to subscribe to Next Chapter Podcast for updates on all the latest content, and don't forget to rate and review our shows. I'm Michael Goodfriend, and I look forward to sharing more incredible works in scripted fiction with you, along with lots of enlightening bonus content at Next Chapter Podcasts.